The Silent Secret of Martha's Box. The old house in Portland, Oregon, smelled of dust, lavender, and forgotten memories. Evelyn, 30 and an artist by trade, felt its weight with every creak of the floorboards. Her grandmother, Martha, had passed away peacefully in her sleep, leaving behind a lifetime of curated silence and a house overflowing with objects that held no obvious stories. Evelyn loved Martha fiercely, but their relationship had always been a quiet one, built on shared cups of tea and unspoken affection, never on revelations about the past. Martha had been a closed book, especially about her younger years. It was in the attic, among the moth-eaten heirlooms and stacks of yellowed newspapers, that Evelyn found it. A small, intricately carved wooden box, tucked away beneath a pile of old linens. Its surface was smooth from countless touches, its brass clasp tarnished with age. A thrill, a premonition, ran down Evelyn's spine. This wasn't just another trinket. This felt different. With trembling fingers, she unfastened the clasp. Inside, nestled on a faded velvet lining, lay a single sepia-toned photograph. It depicted a young woman, strikingly beautiful, with Martha's unmistakable eyes, but younger, vibrant, almost defiant. And in her arms, swaddled tightly, was a baby, a tiny, perfect infant, gazing up at the camera with wide, innocent eyes. Evelyn stared, her breath catching in her throat. A baby. Martha? But Martha had never spoken of a child before Evelyn's mother. There were no family stories, no casual mentions, no faded baby clothes in a forgotten drawer. This picture shattered everything Evelyn thought she knew about her grandmother. Who was this child? Why had Martha kept this secret buried for so long? The silence of the house suddenly felt oppressive, filled with unanswered questions. Chapter 1: The Whispers of a Photograph. The days that followed Martha's funeral were a blur of condolences and the quiet, somber work of dismantling a life. Evelyn found herself drawn back to the attic, not out of duty, but out of a desperate need to understand. The small wooden box, now resting on her bedside table, felt like a constant presence, a silent challenge. The photograph of young Martha and the unknown baby was her anchor, her enigma. Every time Evelyn looked at it, she saw Martha's youthful spirit, a spirit she had only ever known, veiled by age and a quiet reserve. This young Martha, with her bright, worried eyes and the tender way she held the baby, was a stranger. Evelyn's artistic mind, usually so focused on capturing the beauty of the present, was now consumed by the past. She sketched Martha's youthful face from the photograph, trying to imagine the circumstances, the emotions. Why had this part of Martha's life been so completely erased from family lore? Her mother, Martha's only child, was equally mystified. Grandma never talked about her younger days, she'd said, especially not before she met Dad. It was always a blank spot. The mystery deepened, a chasm in the family narrative. Evelyn decided to approach her search methodically. Martha had been meticulous, almost to a fault, in her organization. Evelyn hoped that somewhere, Martha had left a trail, a crumb of information. She sifted through old photo albums, finding no other images of the baby. She checked through utility bills, bank statements, anything that might hint at a life before Portland. Most of Martha's early documents, however, seemed to vanish into the mists of time or had been diligently disposed of. It was as if Martha had consciously scrubbed away traces of a previous existence. Then, tucked beneath the faded velvet lining of the wooden box itself, Evelyn found them. Not letters, not a diary, but a few small, brittle slips of paper. Each was yellowed with age, delicate to the touch. One was an old train ticket stub, dated April 12, 1961, from St. Louis, Missouri, to Portland, Oregon. The ink was faint, but legible. Another was a faded receipt from a dry cleaner in St. Louis, dated just a few weeks before the train ticket. And a third, a tiny, almost illegible note, folded multiple times, simply read, D. 14 Oakwood. He knows. St. Louis. So Martha hadn't always been in Oregon. This was a revelation in itself. Martha had always given the impression that Portland was her home, her only home. She spoke of its roses, its gentle rain, its towering Douglas firs, as if they were ingrained in her very soul from birth. Evelyn felt a surge of excitement mixed with trepidation. She was closer to an answer, but the journey to it felt long and uncertain, like navigating a labyrinth with only whispered directions. D. 14 Oakwood. He knows. A name? An initial? An address? Evelyn typed 14 Oakwood Street, St. Louis, Missouri, into her search engine. The address brought up a picture of an old, charming house, built in the early 20th century, with a large porch and a neglected garden. It looked exactly like the kind of place one might find echoes of the past, a silent witness to forgotten moments. The street itself looked leafy and residential, a quiet haven. She then tried searching for Martha, grandma's maiden name, St. Louis, 1960s. The internet, usually so quick to provide answers, offered nothing definitive. It was like Martha had purposefully erased herself from that time, a deliberate act of historical self-erasure. No marriage records, no birth announcements, no school yearbooks, just silence. Frustrated but undeterred, Evelyn thought about the D. Who would Martha have known in St. Louis whose initial was D? A friend? A family member? A desperate hope flickered within her. Maybe this D could tell her something, could unlock the tightly sealed vault of Martha's past. She remembered an old, tattered address book she had found in Martha's desk drawer, nestled beneath a collection of dried flowers and faded ribbons. It was filled with names and numbers, some scratched out, some barely legible, written in Martha's elegant, looping script. She flipped through the aging pages, her finger tracing names she didn't recognize, names of distant cousins or long-lost acquaintances. And then, near the back, almost hidden by a crease in the brittle paper, written in a different, more hesitant hand, was this entry: Daniel Miller, St. Louis. No address, just a phone number, old and clearly disconnected, its format belonging to an era long past. But the name, Daniel, D. Could it be him? The note had said, he knows. The pieces, though few and scattered, were beginning to form a fragile constellation. Evelyn felt a surge of determination. She would go to St. Louis. She would find Daniel Miller, or whoever might inhabit the house at 14 Oakwood. The truth of her grandmother's life felt tantalizingly close, just beyond the veil of silence. Chapter 2, A Journey to Echoes. The decision to go to St. Louis was made swiftly, driven by an insatiable hunger for answers. Evelyn booked a flight, the old photograph, her constant companion, tucked securely into her travel bag. As the plane soared above the clouds, she imagined Martha as a young woman in St. Louis, a city she had only known through postcards and grainy historical photos. What life had Martha lived there? What had led her to leave it all behind and move across the country, never speaking of the past, as if that entire chapter of her existence had simply never happened. The thought was chilling, yet compelling. Upon arrival in St. Louis, the city felt vibrant and alive, a bustling metropolis with a rich history, a stark contrast to the quiet, almost sepulchral silence of Martha's Portland home. The gateway arch gleamed under the spring sun, a symbol of westward expansion, a poignant reminder of Martha's own migration. Evelyn rented a car, a modern vehicle that felt oddly out of place with her antique quest, and drove straight to Oakwood Street. Number 14 was indeed an old house, charming and well-maintained, clearly lived in. Its paint was fresh, its garden neatly manicured, a testament to loving care. Her heart pounded as she approached the front door. Could Daniel still live here? Or was this just a dead end, a false hope, a faded memory of a former resident? The uncertainty was palpable, a mix of hope and dread. She rang the doorbell. After a moment, the door opened a crack, revealing the cautious face of an elderly woman. Her hair was silver, pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes, though wary, held a spark of intelligence. Evelyn explained her reason for being there, her voice a little shaky, the words tumbling out in a rush. "My name is Evelyn. My grandmother, Martha, used to live here, many years ago. I found this photograph and this address." The woman, whose name was Eleanor, listened patiently, her expression softening as Evelyn spoke of Martha. A flicker of recognition, a slow dawn of memory began to appear in her eyes. "Martha?" Eleanor repeated, a soft smile playing on her lips. "Oh yes, I remember a Martha living here, years and years ago. My parents owned this house back then. I was just a girl, visiting for the summers." She paused, her gaze distant, seemingly drifting back through the decades. "She had a baby, didn't she? A little boy. Such a sweet, quiet young woman. She was always so gentle with him." Evelyn felt a jolt, a powerful current of confirmation coursing through her. This was it, the first undeniable piece of the puzzle. The photograph wasn't a mistake, a misidentification. It was real. "Yes," she whispered, pulling out the photograph and gently handing it to Eleanor. "This is her, and the baby." Eleanor took the photo, her eyes misting over, a profound sense of recognition on her face. That's her, Martha, so young, so beautiful, and her little one. What was his name again? It's been so long. David? Yes, I think it was David. She shook her head gently, a sorrowful expression settling on her features. She went through so much. It was a difficult time for a young woman back then. A terrible, cruel time, really. The implication of Eleanor's words hung in the air, thick with unsaid hardships. Evelyn felt a wave of empathy for the young Martha, a profound understanding of the societal pressures that must have crushed her. "Do you know a Daniel?" Evelyn asked, her voice hushed, hopeful that the other part of her cryptic clue would also yield fruit. "Daniel Miller?" Eleanor thought for a moment, tapping a finger to her chin. Daniel Miller? Oh yes, he was a good friend to Martha, always looking out for her, always there to lend a hand. He was sweet on her, I think, but she only ever saw him as a friend. A true gentleman, though. He moved away years ago, though. To the West, I think. To California, maybe. I believe he went to live near his sister after he retired. Evelyn's heart sank momentarily. Another journey, another potential dead end. But Eleanor, seeing her disappointment, offered a ray of hope, a small but significant gesture of kindness. "You know, Daniel used to send my parents Christmas cards for years. He was very loyal. I might have one tucked away somewhere. Let me check. They kept everything. Eleanor disappeared into the depths of her house. Returning a few minutes later with a small, dusty cardboard box filled with old Christmas cards, tied with a faded red ribbon. After some searching, sifting through decades of holiday greetings, she found one, addressed to her parents. The return address was in a retirement community in Ventura, California. And the sender? Daniel Miller. The journey continued. Ventura, California. The universe, it seemed, wanted Evelyn to find her answers, gently guiding her across states. Through the echoes of time, each step, though tiring, brought her closer to the heart of Martha's silent sorrow. Chapter 3. The Keeper of Memories. Ventura was bathed in golden sunlight, a world away from the somber silence of Martha's Portland home and the humid history of St. Louis. The air was fresh, with the scent of the ocean, a calming contrast to the anxiety that had been Evelyn's constant companion. The retirement community was peaceful, lush with palm trees and vibrant bougainvillea, its residents enjoying the quiet serenity of their later years. Evelyn felt a surge of anticipation, a nervous flutter in her stomach as she approached the reception desk. This was it. This was where the answers lay, or where the trail finally ran cold. "I'm here to see Daniel Miller," she announced, her voice steadier now, infused with a newfound determination. She explained her connection, mentioning Martha's name, and the receptionist, with a kind smile, directed her to Daniel's room. She was led to a small, sunlit room, simply but comfortably furnished. Daniel Miller sat in a wheelchair near a window, gazing out at a meticulously kept garden. He was a frail man, his hands gnarled with age, but his eyes, though clouded by time, held a spark of kindness and an unmistakable intelligence. He looked up as Evelyn entered, a flicker of curiosity in his gaze, perhaps wondering who this young woman was, interrupting his quiet afternoon. "Mr. Miller," Evelyn began, her voice soft, holding out the photograph of young Martha and the baby. "My name is Evelyn. I'm Martha's granddaughter." She held her breath, watching for his reaction. Daniel's eyes widened as he looked at the picture. A profound wave of emotion, a mix of sorrow and tender recognition, crossed his face. He reached out a trembling hand and took the photograph, his gaze fixed on the image of Martha. "Martha," he murmured, his voice raspy with age, barely a whisper. "My dear Martha, my brave, sweet Martha." He brought the photo closer, as if to absorb every detail, his fingers gently tracing the image of Martha's youthful face. He gestured for her to sit in the armchair opposite him. Evelyn explained everything: the discovery of the box, the photograph, the clues that led her from Portland to St. Louis, and finally to him in Ventura. She spoke of Martha's silence, the mystery that had haunted her family, and her desperate need to understand. Daniel listened, his gaze fixed on the photograph, his hand gently tracing the image of Martha and the baby, a silent testament to a past he clearly remembered with vivid clarity. She was very special," he began, his voice soft, almost a whisper, filled with a deep affection and sorrow. "We grew up together in St. Louis, just a few blocks apart. Best friends from childhood. We went to school together, played in the same parks. She was always so bright, so full of life, with a gentle spirit. And then she met a boy. His name was Robert. He was charming, handsome, a little wild, but he was no good, Evelyn. He swept her off her feet, promised her the world. But he was a drifter, and when things got hard, he just disappeared. He left her, and Martha, she was pregnant. Evelyn felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. Her grandmother, alone, pregnant in the 1960s. The social stigma of the era, the whispers, the shame, the ostracization. It was a harsh reality, far removed from the quiet, dignified Martha she knew. The grandmother who baked cookies and tended her rose garden. The courage it must have taken for young Martha to face such a challenge alone was unimaginable. It was so hard for her, Daniel continued, his voice thick with emotion, the memories clearly painful, even after all these years. Her parents, they were good people, deeply religious, but strict. They couldn't face the scandal. In their eyes, it was a disgrace. They made her leave home, sent her away to a home for unwed mothers, far from St. Louis, so no one would know. It was a terrible time. She was so young, barely 18, and all alone. He paused, a single tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek, a testament to the enduring pain of those memories. She named him David. He was a beautiful baby, a healthy, strong little boy. But Martha had no money, no support, no job. She was just a girl herself, fresh out of high school. And the people at the home, they pressured her to give him up, for adoption. They told her it was the only way David would have a good life, a chance she couldn't give him. It broke her heart, Evelyn. It absolutely broke all our hearts, mine included. Evelyn gasped, the sound of profound understanding escaping her lips. David, her grandmother's son, her uncle, the secret that had silently haunted Martha for decades, a wound that had never truly healed. The magnitude of Martha's sacrifice, the depth of her silent suffering, was almost overwhelming. She fought it, Evelyn. Oh, how she fought, Daniel said, his voice stronger now, filled with the memory of Martha's fierce maternal love and her desperate struggle. She clung to him for as long as she could, but in the end, she had no choice. She wanted him to have a good life, a chance she couldn't give him, a real family, a stable home. She believed it was the only way to save him. It was the hardest thing she ever did. She said goodbye to him, and then she packed her bags and came here, to Portland, to start over, to escape the memories, the shame, the constant reminders. He described Martha's anguish, her tearful goodbyes to baby David, the hollow ache that had followed her for years. Daniel had been her confidant, her rock during that time. He had visited her at the home, risking his parents' disapproval, just to bring her comfort. He had watched her suffer, powerless to help, offering only his unwavering friendship and support. He recalled how Martha's spirit had dimmed after David was gone, how a piece of her light had gone out, never to fully return. She tried to find him, Daniel revealed, his eyes meeting Evelyn's, a deep sadness in their depths. Years later, when she had some stability, when she was married and had your mother, she tried again. She felt this overwhelming need to know he was safe, that he was happy. But the adoption records were sealed so tightly back then. The agency was uncooperative. She hired private investigators, spent all her savings, every spare penny. She wrote letters, made phone calls, but she never found him. Not a trace. It was her greatest sorrow, a wound that never truly healed, even after all these years. That's why she never spoke of it. The pain was too great. He reached under his pillow, his movements slow and deliberate, and pulled out a small, worn envelope, its edges softened by time and countless touches. "I kept this," he said, handing it to Evelyn. "A copy of the adoption papers. Martha gave them to me, just in case. She always hoped, that one day someone would find him. Someone would finish her search. She always held on to a sliver of hope that he was out there, living a good life, and perhaps one day he would look for her." Chapter 4. Echoes of David. Evelyn held the old papers, her hands trembling, the weight of their contents almost unbearable. They were brittle and faded, the typewritten words almost ghostly, but the information was there, clear and precise. David Miller, born June 12, 1962, St. Louis, Missouri, adopted by the Peterson family in Seattle, Washington, on September 15, 1962. Seattle, so close, just a few hours' drive from Portland. All these years, David had been living so near to Martha, unknowingly. The proximity, the missed connection, felt like a cruel twist of fate. Evelyn's heart ached for Martha, for the decades of yearning and unfulfilled hope. Back in Portland, the quiet solitude of Martha's house, which once felt stifling, now became a sanctuary for her renewed mission. Evelyn began a new search, armed with concrete, verifiable information. The internet, a tool Martha had never fully embraced, a technology that hadn't existed during her desperate search, became Evelyn's most powerful ally. She typed in David Peterson, born 1962, Seattle. The initial results were overwhelming. Many David Petersons populated the digital landscape. She refined her search. David Peterson, Seattle, June 1962, adopted. And then she found it. An obituary. David Peterson, born June 12, 1962, died October 2019, age 57. Beloved husband of Susan, cherished father of Michael and Emily. A kind soul, known for his infectious laugh and unwavering optimism. He dedicated his life to teaching history and his family. Evelyn's breath hitched in her throat. Her eyes scanned the words, recognizing the birth date. David, her grandmother's son, her uncle. He had lived a full, rich life. He had found love, had children, had pursued a meaningful career. He had a family, but he was gone. Martha had tried for so long, and yet she had missed him by just a few years. The irony was devastating, a fresh wave of sorrow for the grandmother who had carried this secret burden for so long. The profound regret she imagined Martha would have felt if she had known was almost unbearable. But then another thought sparked, a new glimmer of light in the midst of her sadness. Michael and Emily, her cousins. She had family she didn't know about, a connection to the secret that had defined Martha's life, a legacy for Martha. Evelyn found Susan Peterson on social media. She looked at the photos, a kind-faced woman, her eyes warm and welcoming, two grown children smiling at the camera. Michael, a young man in his late 20s, with a striking resemblance to the baby in Martha's photo. The same earnest gaze, the same strong chin. Emily, a few years younger, with bright, intelligent eyes and a sensitive expression, a familiar kindness that reminded Evelyn of Martha. They looked like a happy, loving family. It was a difficult decision. How do you approach a family with such a revelation? How do you drop such a bombshell into their lives? Evelyn drafted and redrafted a letter, her fingers hovering over the send button for hours. She wanted to be respectful, gentle, but also clear. She explained who she was, shared the incredible story of Martha, the photograph, the long-kept secret, and her arduous search. She included a scanned copy of the photograph of Martha and baby David, the definitive proof. She explained that Martha had passed away, and this was her way of honoring her grandmother's unspoken wish, her lifelong yearning to know. She offered to meet, or simply to share more of Martha's story, if they were open to it. She made sure to emphasize that she sought no imposition, only connection. The wait was agonizing. Days turned into a week. Evelyn checked her email constantly, her phone always close at hand, the anticipation a dull ache in her chest. She imagined every possible scenario, from outright rejection to an emotional embrace. And then, one afternoon, an email arrived from Susan Peterson. The subject line read, "Regarding David and Martha, a profound discovery." Evelyn opened it, her hands shaking, her heart hammering against her ribs. The email was long, heartfelt, and filled with a warmth that instantly put Evelyn at ease. Susan explained that David had always known he was adopted. His adoptive parents, wonderful, loving people, had told him early on, making sure he understood how deeply he was wanted. But he had always wondered about his birth mother, about his roots. He had even, on occasion, tried to find her, just as Martha had searched for him. But he too had faced the same impenetrable, sealed records. He had never found her, and it had been a quiet, lifelong yearning, a question mark in his own narrative. Susan wrote about David's life, his kindness, his infectious laugh, his unwavering optimism, his deep love for his family. She spoke of his passion for teaching history, a profound love for the past, a poignant irony. And then, at the end, she wrote words that brought tears to Evelyn's eyes. "Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you for bringing Martha to us, for giving us this missing piece of David's story. He would have been so incredibly happy to know." He often spoke of wondering who she was, where she came from. "You have given us a beautiful gift. We would be honored to meet you. Please come to Seattle. We have so much to talk about." Chapter 5, Threads Unfurled. Evelyn arranged to meet Susan, Michael, and Emily in Seattle the following weekend. The drive felt different this time. Not a desperate quest, but a pilgrimage of connection, a journey towards a new beginning. The reunion was, in a word, profound. There were tears, not just of sadness for the lost time, but of immense joy and relief. There were tentative hugs, which quickly became firm embraces, and an overwhelming sense of connection, as if pieces of a long-lost puzzle were finally clicking into place. Evelyn saw Martha in Michael's eyes, a quiet strength she recognized instantly. Emily had Martha's artistic hands, her contemplative gaze. They sat for hours in Susan's cozy living room, surrounded by photographs of David's life, sharing stories, bridging the gap of over 60 years of separation. Evelyn told them about Martha, her quiet dignity, her love for her family, her hidden grief, and the silent sorrow she carried for so long. She spoke of the photograph, the wooden box, Daniel Miller, and the long, winding journey of discovery. It was a testament to Martha's enduring love and sacrifice. Susan, in turn, shared stories of David, his quirks, his booming laugh, his passion for obscure historical facts, his unwavering kindness. They pored over family albums, finding uncanny resemblances, moments that mirrored each other across generations. They discovered that David had inherited Martha's love for gardening, and that he had a quiet, thoughtful nature, just like his birth mother. Michael and Emily were fascinated, their faces reflecting a mixture of wonder and emotion. To learn they had a grandmother they never knew, a woman who had carried their father in her womb, who had yearned for him throughout her life, was an emotional revelation. They showed Evelyn photos of David as a baby, small and plump, a mirror image of the infant in Martha's arms in that single treasured photograph. It was startling to see the resemblance, a tangible link across the decades. "He would have loved her so much," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion, tears welling in her eyes. "He always talked about wanting to know his birth mother." He just never thought he'd find her. And now, thanks to you, we know her. We know her story. Evelyn felt a deep, cleansing peace wash over her. The weight of Martha's secret, the silent sorrow she had carried for so long, was finally lifted. She understood now. Martha hadn't spoken of her past, not out of shame, but out of a profound pain she had carried alone, a grief that had been too raw, too deeply ingrained to share. She had kept the photograph, not as a torment, but as a silent testament to the enduring love she had for her son, a private memory she couldn't bear to let go of, a hope that one day, somehow, the truth would emerge. The visit stretched over several days, filled with laughter, shared meals, and a growing sense of belonging. Evelyn felt an instant bond with her newfound family. She had come seeking answers about her grandmother's past, and she had found not only those answers, but also a new branch on her family tree, a new connection to the world, a widening of her own personal narrative. It was an unexpected, beautiful gift. Back in Portland, the house still smelled of Martha, but the silence was different now. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the echoes of a life finally understood, a mystery unveiled, a love story spanning generations. Evelyn carefully placed the wooden box back on the attic shelf, its purpose fulfilled. But this time, the photograph lay openly on her desk, framed in a simple silver frame, a constant reminder of Martha's strength, her sacrifice, and the enduring power of love that could transcend time and silence. She imagined Martha, now free, finally reunited with her son David in a place beyond secrets and sorrow. Perhaps they were gardening together, or simply sitting in quiet contentment, their bond finally unbroken. And Evelyn, too, felt free, free to embrace a fuller, richer understanding of her grandmother, and to welcome the new family that had emerged from the depths of a hidden past. The journey had been long, winding through states and through time, but the truth, finally revealed, was a profound and beautiful gift. It wasn't just a story of loss, but of enduring love, forgiveness, and the unexpected ways in which the past, even the most painful parts, can profoundly shape the present, giving birth to new connections and a deeper understanding of the human heart, even after decades of silence.